Okay, in this last series of podcasts, I want to have Texas almost accidentally gain its independence from Mexico. So let's return to Davy Crockett for a second. And the issue of Davy Crockett is, why do people care if Davy Crockett died the day of the Alamo or he died the day after? He died a horrible death. There's no doubt about that. He died fighting for Texas independence. And what's even more interesting, as Chris shows, um, up until the mid 1950s, books had been published that had images of Davy Crockett being led to Santa Ana the day after the execution. So people, historians, the public was pretty laid back about when Davy Crockett died, because the point is he died within, at least by the next day. What happens in the 1950s, and I have an image up, I don't know if you could see it. Walt Disney put on a show, the story of Davy Crockett, with the actor named Fess Parker. And I just can't tell you what a hit that TV show was. It was unbelievable. The whole thing about coonskin caps and lunch pails, and it just went on and on and on. It really would rival Star Wars uh, or other kinds of really popular movies. I can't think of one now, but Star Wars will do for now. Um, in the sense that Americans became obsessed with this TV show about Davy Crockett. And he became a real icon, and he became an icon in the middle of the Cold War when Americans were scared of the Soviet Union. We felt like also we needed a hero that was willing to die for the cause, because we wanted to show the Soviets that we were willing to die in order to save capitalism from communism. And so in the mid 1950s, Davy Crockett got this huge new lease on life. And the significance of him, the 1950s Davy Crockett, he becomes kind of a Cold War icon of American determination and almost American desire to almost commit suicide rather than to give in to tyranny. Now, the other thing is, and I think it's fair to say, that for many Anglos, Crockett became kind of an icon of the traditional view of Texas history that saw the Texas Revolution as a race war of whites against Tejanos and Mexican Americans, and that for, I would say, a significant number of Anglos, Crockett becomes an icon of white determination, in particular white courage, white willingness to die for a cause against an evil enemy that in this case turned out to be brown skinned, Spanish speaking, Roman Catholic, and had ruled Texas for hundreds of years, or at least the Spanish and the Mexicans. So the other thing that happens with Davy Crockett, it becomes racial. Davy Crockett becomes a racial icon as well, as a kind of white versus brown, and the determination of the white race. And the thing that I've also talked about quite a bit, the story of Davy Crockett, the way the Texas Revolution was kind of told, it was used to legitimate Anglo rule over Texas. Remember, Texas had been ruled by first the Spanish and then Mexico until 1836. After 1836, the world just turns upside down. Texas, and this is what we're going to talk about in the second half of the course, Texas is ruled by Anglos. San Antonio, for instance, becomes a second class city compared to Austin. Austin is created, just think of the name Austin. What you're starting to have is, instead of Hispanic names or Latino names or Mexican names, what you're having is new cities in Texas are Austin, Houston, Dallas, right? Texas is becoming economically, socially dominated by Anglos. And the story of the Texas Revolution, including in part the story of Davy Crockett, becomes it becomes deployed. The history of the Texas Revolution becomes deployed in such a way to justify Anglo dominance. Now, Santa Anna makes that a little bit easier because not so much of the Alamo, because the Alamo really was a battle. Although the execution of Crockett and the other men, which I think that's what happened. I think Crockett was captured and killed the next day. That was a war atrocity, but certainly Goliad, which I'm going to talk about in a later podcast, that was without a doubt a war atrocity. That was the outright murder of over 400 men. So Santa Anna made it kind of easy for Anglo-Texans to despise people of Mexican origin. And one of the things that's really important about the Pena Diary is it demonstrates that the Mexican soldiers were horrified by what Santa Anna had ordered in the murder of these captives. And what's important about that is that when I was a kid, I never really thought about what Mexican soldiers thought. I just kind of merged Mexican soldiers with Santa Anna. I saw them as kind of one and the same. And one of the important parts of the Pena Diary is Mexican soldiers become humanized. They're angry at Santa Anna because he kind of botched the attack on the Alamo by not waiting for his artillery to show up. But he was just determined not to allow the defenders of the Alamo to surrender. He wanted to massacre them. He wanted a sensational victory, and he wanted a redo of what Arredondo had done in 1813. He wants also to send a message not only to the revolt in Texas, but he wants to send a message to all the people in Mexico. And remember, there are many parts of Mexico that were revolting against Santa Anna during this time, Zacatecas, the Yucatan. So by massacring everybody at the Alamo, Santa Anna, and I'm not trying to justify Santa Anna's actions, of course, but he's sending a message to all of Mexico, or he's trying to, that if you cross me, I'll come and I'll annihilate you. So Mexican soldiers, though, they don't buy into that. Uh, they think Santa Anna is cruel. They're demoralized by this atrocity. And think about the word demoralized. The root is moral, right? Their morality is taken away from them because they're forced to take part in these massacres, and they're sickened by Santa Anna. So the Mexican army now in the Pena Diary becomes humanized. We start to see individuals that have minds of their own in a way that really, when I was a kid, you never thought of Mexican soldiers having minds of their own. That they were just, if I can use this analogy, and this is maybe kind of dated, but I'll say it anyway. And in saying this, I'm trying to get across the presentation of Mexican soldiers, and you'll see this in the chapter, The Paint and the Knife Brush. Mexican soldiers were almost presented as orcs if you saw Lord of the Rings. And I guess y'all still watch Lord of the Rings as kind of time marches on. But if you've watched Lord of the Rings, or even, what's the other, just The Hobbit, it's ridiculous how many orcs are killed in those movies. I almost started feeling sorry for the orcs. They're just getting massacred. It's ridiculous. I kind of don't like those movies as much now as I did when they came out. But they're faceless, they're brutal, they have to be killed. They're just instruments of evil. Well, with Pena, we suddenly now Mexican soldiers lose that status and they become human beings. They're put in a very tough spot by an inept and a cruel leader. So the discussion about Davy Crockett, I think, is really interesting because it talks about history and identity. I think for a lot of Texans, when they think about Davy Crockett, it kind of gives them personal strength. People's own personal identity get tied up into historical figures and historical heroes. So if you kind of question them, you're questioning the person's identity. I think there were Cold War aspects of it about American determination. I have to say, I think there's racial aspects of it as well, in terms of groups of Anglos thinking that they're better than people of Mexican descent, basically racism. And if you question when Davy died, you're questioning Anglo superiority. I think something else is going on with Davy Crockett, and the controversy over when he died. It's questions over how did Texas become an independent nation? How did it become part of the United States? It's kind of whitewashing history in a way. And one of the things about history, it's always much more interesting than it's presented in the public. So this is why the discussion about Davy Crockett to me is just extremely fascinating, because it talks about the importance of history and the importance of history in creating the present. And of course, if you create the present, you're also creating the future. We take Davy Crockett for granted because he's one of ours, right? He's a Texan. We've heard about it all our lives. But the controversy and the complexity of the story of Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie as well, who had tried to steal land in Louisiana before he came to Texas. Travis, William Barrett Travis, someone who had murdered we think, had murdered his wife's lover. The complexities of this story, it just makes it far more interesting and far more dramatic than the kind of flattened and boring and celebratory Texas history that a lot of us have been spoon-fed when we were kids.